Welcome to another WikiReads from IdeaHouseDesigns.com. We hope you enjoy. The 1788 Doctors Riot. The 1788 Doctors Riot was an incident that occurred in April, 1788, in New York City, where the illegal grave robbing of corpses caused a riot from the poorer New Yorkers. The riot was directed primarily at physicians and medical students. Background. By the end of the American Revolution, roughly one-fifth of the population of New York City was black, and most were slaves. The construction of New York City was accomplished largely with slave labor. Their low social standing allowed slaves' bodies to be buried only outside the city limits. Most often, they were buried with several bodies to a grave, in a site then known as the Negroes' Burying Ground. The cemetery was close to Columbia College, which housed the city's only school of medicine. Taboos associated with the violation of corpses made it difficult to procure dead bodies for dissection and study. Many students and doctors would resort to stealing dead bodies from the nearby graveyards because of the socially marginalized status of the black population. Body snatching or grave robbing was the cheapest, surest way to obtain the remains of the newly deceased, especially in the winter, when bodies decayed more slowly. The riot. In April 1788, a group of children were playing outside the New York hospital, next to a room where a student, John Hicks, was dissecting an arm. John Hicks then waved the arm out at the children, telling a boy whose mother had recently died, that it was his dead mother's arm. The boy ran home and told his father what happened. The father, after digging up his wife's coffin and finding it empty, gathered a group of concerned citizens who marched to the hospital and began to mass around the building. The mob eventually broke into the hospital and found several bodies in various stages of mutilation. They pulled doctors and a number of students into the street, until the mayor of New York City intervened and ordered the doctors and students to be escorted to the jailhouse for protection. A crowd of 2,000 people had gathered, and news spread of the horrors seen in the hospital, leading to widespread rioting. The few physicians remaining in New York City were then forced into hiding. As the rioters assembled in front of the courthouse and threw rocks, militia and cavalry were called in to repel them. The riot lasted a few days, ceasing when the governor sent the militia to patrol the streets. At least 3 rioters and 3 militiamen died in the confrontation, some estimate up to 20 dead. The protesters also destroyed all the available human specimens. Effects of the riot. Public opinion of physicians in New York stood very low for many years, and while some students were brought to trial, Hicks was not among them. Post-mortem dissection was considered an indignity to the dead, and the city fathers disallowed using bodies abandoned in the rougher parts of the city. A year later, in January 1789, a statute was finally put into law in order to codify the proper treatment of corpses, with harsh punishments imposed for those who violated it. Anyone who broke the law would stand on the pillory or be publicly whipped, fined, or imprisoned. The statute also permitted the bodies of executed criminals to be used in dissection. To discourage dueling, the Massachusetts General Court also imposed dissection as a threat by ruling that anyone who died as a result of a duel would be sentenced to post-mortem dissection and dismemberment. Dissection was seen as perhaps one of the worst things that could happen to a person other than death. This was in part created using text from Wikipedia under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license.